Is Genesis a polemic against Egypt and surrounding pagan nations?
Okay. Well, I took a lot of time to make hard copies of the answers to these questions for you, Dagan. But I'll just not instead of read this, I'll just kind of summarize my answers. Is Genesis a polemic against Egypt and surrounding pagan nations? That's a good question, and the answer is yes. But it's a polemic in that it argues against the beliefs that were current in Egypt and other pagan nations. And yet at the same time, it's much more than a polemic. It's didactic. That is, it teaches truth about God and his will for man. And also, it's an irenic. An irenic, I'll read the definition here.
I was just about to ask.
Irenic means conducive to or operating toward peace, moderation, or conciliation. It's from the Greek word meaning peace. In Greek mythology, the goddess of peace was called Irene. Her name gave rise to irenic and other peaceable terms, including irenics, which is a theological term for advocacy of Christian union. So the answer is that Genesis is a polemic in that, like all idolatrous nations, Egypt had its creation flood myths, pantheon of gods, and its own self-glorifying national origin story. All of these things Moses corrects in his Genesis account, especially in chapters 1 through 11, where we learn there's one God who created heaven and earth and everything in them. And we learn how when men rebelled against God, he scattered them, creating the nations. And so the origin of Egypt as a nation, as well as all others, is there in Genesis chapters 10 and 11. So my answer is that Genesis 1 through 11 generally is a polemic against Egypt and its gods. But it's so much more than that. Or in chapter 12 through the end of the book, you have the history of Abraham and of Israel, which is salvation history. And so we learn throughout the book that there's a universal need for salvation from sin. And we have also the presentation of Jesus prophetically as the solution to the sin problem and the one who would sacrifice himself for sinners and open the way to peace. Therein, again, the irenic purpose of Genesis.
So Genesis is a polemic amongst many other things.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
So,
right.
like when Genesis says, in the beginning, God created or we'll just go to, the day God created the sun. And so that would be a polemic against, let's say, the sun god Molech of the pagan nations. So God's goal here was, now that he's got Israel out of Egypt, away from Pharaoh, he's now trying to get Egypt out of Israel.
That's well said.
Okay. That's perfect. And then this kind of goes along with Genesis account because a lot of people think Genesis is like a scientific, like an orderly account, which I don't really have an opinion on personally. But can science and the Bible be true at the same time? Example can be like, can the earth have been created in 6 days or 6,000 years and be 4 billion years old?
Well, the answer is science and the Bible, can they both be true at the same time? The answer is yes. But the example that you're giving about the age of the earth, can it be both 6,000 years and 4 billion years old? Logically, no. So this is a very important question. And dealing with the example of the age of the earth first, this is not a debate between science and the Bible, or they're not in conflict over this. Obviously, the earth cannot be both 6,000 years old and 4 billion years old. The 6,000-year-old theory comes from the Bible. It's based on the generations that are recorded in Genesis 5 and 11. For example, Adam lived 130 years and had a son named Seth, and Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh, and so forth. You add up all those dates or those lifespans, and in relation to when the son was born, you come up with about 6,000 years. So that is based on the Bible. The 4 billion years idea is based on the theories of evolution and uniformitarianism, which are not supported by observational science. It's very important to make the distinction between observational science, where you can experiment, repeat, record the results, and test it. Observational science is good. Evolutionary science and the theory of uniformitarianism, that is, that natural processes have continued basically unchanged and created everything that is. That is not observational science. That's scientism, which is a religion. So you've got the Bible, which is a religion, and then you've got scientism, which is a religion. So it's competing religious views, not based on science. The Bible's not a science book,
Right.
but neither is evolution good science. And so the theory of the age of the Earth being 4,000 years old, that, by the way, came from a geologist named Charles Liddell, who created the geologic column and says that the layers of the Earth were laid down uniformly over time following natural processes. And so you've got that theory versus the catastrophic view of Earth history, which the Bible holds the catastrophic view, obviously, with the flood, rearranging the Earth dramatically in a short period of time. And I would just point out that we have a modern day example of catastrophism versus uniformitarianism. And that's Mount St. Helens that erupted in 1980. When that thing erupted, it created a canyon 1/3 the size of the Grand Canyon in just a few days or weeks. And so that's an example of how Earth history is dramatically changed by such events, rather than supporting the view of Charles Liddell and other evolutionary theorists. So my short answer is evolution is a theory, and uniformitarianism is a model based on blind faith. The Bible's a historical narrative completely in harmony with observational science. There is no conflict between the Bible and observational science.
Okay, so before I ask my other question, what do you personally, how old do you personally?
At least 6,000 years, maybe more than that, because the genealogies, I've been reading, I read a lot about this, and I do believe there's reason to suspect that there's some gaps in the genealogies. Not a million years or gap, but maybe going from grandfather to grandson and omitting the father of the son.
So let's say that there are gaps in the genealogy, and humans were the last thing God created, right? So what about all the time before that? Like the Earth was created before humans were. So maybe the Earth was here, for like from our perspective, 4 billion years. But I guess what science says, or what scientists say, science doesn't say anything. What scientists say is that humans have been here for about 100,000 or so years. And so could there be enough gaps in genealogy for us to have been on Earth for 100,000?
Well, you're getting closer to reality when you say 100,000 as opposed to millions or billions. Um, there's not huge gaps in the genealogies. Once you start with Adam and go forward in time, you're talking about a relatively short space of time. Now you're asking about what's called the gap theory, where there's supposed to be millions or billions of years between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. In the beginning, he created the heavens and the earth, and then uh, he began to think about what he was going to do with it in Genesis 1:2, and maybe he thought for millions or billions of years. That's a theory that I personally don't accept because there's no justification in those first two verses of the Bible to insert that time. The only reason that you would insert that time in there is to make it compatible, the Bible compatible with evolutionary science, which I've said is not good science.
Okay, so
You cannot observe what happened in the past, and you cannot observe what's going to happen in the future with observational science. It's what you see here and now, and how do you try to make sense of it?
so let's say could God, if he wanted to, change the laws of nature like anytime he wants?
I can do anything he wants.
So could it be that from our perspective that it looks like that the universe is 4 billion years old,
Mm.
and but from God's perspective it is 6,000 years old or 6 days, and but from our perspective it'd be 4 billion years because he had changed the laws of nature in that time, and like that makes it look like today that it is 4 billion years old in reality. It's not. It's just he had sped up the speed of light. He had sped up this law of nature and that law of nature, and it just looks that way to us.
Okay, I understand your question.
Okay, I don't know if I explained that well or not.
No, it's good. Um, I wouldn't say that God changes the laws of nature. He intervenes or interrupts the laws of nature to do miracles. But you're asking about the appearance of the earth being, from our perspective, it looks like it's that old. Whereas, in fact, God knows that He did everything in 6 days, and then it's been 6,000 plus years. My answer to that would be that, yeah, God created everything full grown, mature looking. Adam and Eve weren't born as babies; they were created fully developed human beings.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I asked that because there's a lot of like, atheists that are like, well, science is the only way to truth. Well, I mean, is that is that a scientific truth? Well, it's not, but they like I feel like for them to, switch over to like theism and then eventually, hopefully, Jesus, it would be a very hard change for them because they grew up their whole life like science. It is true, it's real, when indeed we think Jesus is the only true and real thing. So
Well, some of the greatest scientists science is based on the Bible because God created an orderly universe with consistent consistent rules of natural laws that we can measure, observe, uh, depend on. And so science really owes its origin to the fact that God created the way He did. And then scientists like Isaac Newton and others, they were believers. And yes, it would be hard for somebody that is committed to atheism and evolution to change their views. It would be. But they've got to recognize, I think, that the uh, evidence, which they're interpreting one way and I would interpret another, they have to recognize that the evidence uh, has nothing to do with the way it was in the past. What we look at the same thing with our bias, and we make decisions about what we are looking at based on what our worldview is. Do we believe that there's a creator God, or do we believe there's no God and that everything's chance plus time?
I actually hear that a lot. Like, I think they're calling it these days. Like, some people be like, "Well, God of the gaps," right? You've heard that before.
Mhm.
And then, well, we might have God of the gaps, which I honestly I don't think so because our God doesn't fill a gap. He's outside of space and time.
That's right.
But they have evolution of the gaps. If they don't understand something, they just throw evolution in there. Like, well, he evolved to be that way.
That's exactly right.
And so I just find that really interesting how they're so quick to be like God of the gaps when it's like evolution of the gaps. It's the same thing. It's just different words.
Yeah. We don't just throw God in there to fill gaps in knowledge. We've got to remember that the Bible is not observational science, it's revelation. And so, first, do I believe there's a God? And second, do I believe that He's revealed His will to man, spoken to mankind? And I, uh, the Bible presents itself as just exactly that, the word of the God who made everything to the men that He loves and cares about.